The
punch
words
you.
cut through the humid Miami
Ma'am,
air
this is
like a
first
blade,
class
sharp and
boarding!
dismissive. Marcus Rodriguez, gate agent for Sky Vista Airlines, didn't even look up from his computer screen when he delivered the assumption. His tone carried the practiced indifference of someone who had made this mistake 1,000 times before and never bothered to learn from it. Diana Mitchell stood perfectly still in the premium boarding line, her canvas messenger bag slung over one shoulder, worn sneakers planted firmly on the polished terminal floor. She was dressed in faded jeans, a soft gray hoodie, and running shoes that had seen better years. To Marcus, she was exactly what he expected to see in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Diana didn't move. She didn't apologize. She didn't shuffle toward the economy line like so many others had done before her. Instead, she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a boarding pass, placing it gently on the marble counter between them. "Seat 1A, she said, her voice calm as morning coffee. "First class." Marcus finally looked up. His eyes flicked from the boarding pass to Diana's outfit, then back to the boarding pass. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard for a moment, caught between protocol and prejudice. "There must be some mistake," he said, picking up the boarding pass with 2 fingers as if it might contaminate him. "Seat 1A is reserved for our Platinum Elite members. The system probably generated an error." Diana's expression didn't change. She had been through this dance before in different places with different people, but always the same song. "Scan it," she said simply. Marcus reluctantly ran the boarding pass under his scanner, fully expecting the system to beep in protest to validate his assumption, to prove that this woman in her casual clothes had somehow gotten hold of a ticket that wasn't meant for her. The scanner beeped cheerfully. "Green light, valid ticket, platinum status confirmed." Marcus's brow furrowed as he stared at the screen. He typed rapidly, searching for some explanation, some glitch that would make sense of what he was seeing. "Well," he said, his voice tight with confusion and barely concealed irritation, "it seems the system is accepting it. Although I must warn you, the dress code in first class is usually more formal." Diana took her boarding pass back with the same calm precision with which she had presented it. "I'm comfortable, Marcus," she said, reading his name tag. "That's all that matters." She walked toward the security checkpoint, leaving Marcus staring after her with the uncomfortable realization that perhaps his assumptions weren't as reliable as he'd thought. Diana Mitchell wasn't just any passenger. She was the founder and CEO of TechFlow Dynamics, a logistics AI company that had revolutionized global shipping and made her worth $12 billion. But today, she wasn't Diana Mitchell, the tech mogul. Today, she was just a tired woman who wanted to sleep during the 6-hour flight to London. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Diana had signed the papers to acquire Sky Vista Airlines just 3 hours ago. The ink was still drying on the deal that made her the owner of the very airline whose gate agent had just tried to send her away. 20 minutes later, boarding began for flight SK447. Diana was among the first to step onto the jet bridge, her boarding pass granting her priority access to the Boeing 777 that would be her home for the next 6 hours. The aircraft was magnificent, the crown jewel of the Sky Vista fleet, with its polished exterior gleaming under the terminal lights. At the aircraft door stood the crew ready to welcome their premium passengers with the kind of service that justified the $1,000 tickets. Leading them was Captain Isabella Hartwell, a woman who believed that aviation was as much about maintaining standards as it was about moving people across continents. Isabella was everything Diana wasn't, at least on the surface. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place. Her captain's uniform was tailored to perfection, crisp white shirt, navy blazer, with 4 gold bars on each shoulder and shoes that reflected the cabin lights like mirrors. At 38, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had never questioned her right to be where she was. When Diana approached the aircraft door, Isabella's trained smile faltered for just a moment. Her eyes took in the hoodie, the jeans, the worn sneakers, and something shifted in her expression. "Boarding pass, please," Isabella said, extending a manicured hand. Diana handed over this document. Isabella examined it with the intensity of a detective studying evidence at a crime scene. "1A." Isabella's eyebrows rose slightly. "There must be some mistake. Wait here while I check with the gate." The gate agent already verified it, Diana said, her patience beginning to thin. "I'd like to take my seat now." "I'm sure you would." Isabella replied, her voice taking on a condescending edge that she probably didn't even realize was there. "But as captain of this aircraft, I have a responsibility to ensure the safety and comfort of all our passengers. We have a very exclusive guest list today, including Senator Blackwood. I need to make certain there haven't been any irregularities." She emphasized the word irregularities while looking pointedly at Diana's attire, as if casual clothing were somehow a security threat. Diana felt the familiar weight of other passengers' eyes on her as they queued behind her on the jet bridge. She could hear whispers starting the low murmur of people who sensed drama but weren't sure what they were witnessing. "Captain Hartwell," Diana said, reading the name tag. "My ticket is valid. I have a confirmed seat in first class. I would appreciate it if you would allow me to board." Isabella's smile grew colder. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see additional identification and proof of payment method. It's not personal, you understand. It's just that people like you don't typically fly in this section." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. People like you. The phrase that had followed Diana through business meetings, academic conferences, and now apparently onto aircraft she happened to own. People like me. Diana's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath the silk. "I just mean..." Isabella backtracked slightly, realizing she had said too much, but not understanding why it mattered. "This is our premium cabin. There are certain expectations." Diana reached into her messenger bag and pulled out her wallet, extracting a driver's license and the black American Express Centurion card that had paid for the ticket. She placed both on the small counter beside the aircraft door. Isabella examined the documents as if she were a forensics expert. The name matched. The card was clearly genuine. Everything was in order, but somehow that seemed to make her more suspicious rather than less. "This is highly irregular," Isabella muttered, though what exactly was irregular about a passenger having valid identification and a method of payment remained unclear. "What's irregular," Diana said quietly, "is a paying passenger being interrogated at the aircraft door because of her clothing choices." Isabella finally stepped aside, allowing Diana to enter the aircraft, but the damage was already done. The delay had created a bottleneck on the jet bridge, and the whispers from other passengers had grown louder. Everyone now knew that there was some kind of problem with the woman in the hoodie. Diana walked into this first-class cabin, a sanctuary of cream leather and polished wood that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. Seat 1A was a throne, a wide leather recliner that converted into a fully flat bed positioned at the very front of the cabin with a view of the cockpit door. As Diana stowed her bag in the overhead compartment, she became aware of the eyes on her. The first-class cabin held 16 passengers, and it seemed like all of them were staring. In Seat 1B sat Victoria Pemberton, a woman whose diamond earrings probably cost more than most people's cars. Her Chanel suit was the color of champagne, and her disapproval was the color of winter. She leaned toward her traveling companion and whispered loudly enough for Diana to hear. "I can't believe they let just anyone into first class these days. I mean, look at her. She's dressed like she's going to the gym." The man beside her, wearing a Rolex that caught the cabin light, chuckled softly. Probably used miles or points. Some sweepstakes winner, no doubt. Diana settled into her seat and pulled out her noise-canceling headphones, trying to create a barrier between herself and the judgment that filled the cabin like turbulence. She had dealt with this her entire career, the assumption that she didn't belong in boardrooms at conferences in first-class cabins. Usually, she could brush it off, understanding that their prejudice was their problem, not hers. But today felt different. Today she was tired from 36 hours of negotiations to buy this airline, tired from years of proving herself in rooms where she was the only person who looked like her. Tired from being polite to people who saw her as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. Isabella appeared again, this time carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who had found a solution to an unwanted problem. "Ma'am," she said, stopping beside Diana's seat. "I've been reviewing the manifest and there seems to be an issue with your reservation. I'm going to need to see proof of purchase for this ticket." Diana looked up from her phone. "Excuse me, your ticket," Isabella repeated, speaking slowly as if Diana might not understand. "I need to see proof that you purchased it legitimately. Sometimes there are issues with fraudulent bookings, stolen credit cards, that sort of thing." The cabin had grown quiet. Every conversation had stopped. Every passenger was now openly listening to what was happening in seat 1A. Diana felt her jaw tighten. "Are you accusing me of fraud, Captain? I'm not accusing anyone of anything," Isabella said, her voice taking on the false sweetness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "I'm simply following standard security protocols for everyone's safety and comfort." Victoria Pemberton chose that moment to insert herself into the conversation. "Captain, I have to say I'm a bit concerned as well. This is why I pay for first class to avoid these kinds of situations." "What situations would those be?" Diana asked, turning to face Victoria directly. Victoria's cheeks flushed slightly, but she lifted her chin with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged for her opinions. "Well, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? You're not exactly what one would expect in first class." The words were out there now, hanging in the climate-controlled air of the cabin like a toxic cloud. The mask of politeness had slipped, revealing the ugly truth underneath. Diana stood slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. She was tall, 5'9", and when she stood to her full height, she commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with her clothing and everything to do with her presence. "What exactly did you expect?" Diana asked, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "And what exactly do I look like to you?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. She had expected Diana to shrink to apologize, to quietly accept the insult and perhaps even agree with it. She hadn't expected to be challenged. I didn't mean," Victoria stammered. "Yes, you did," Diana said simply. "You meant exactly what you said. Before we see what happens next in this incredible story of prejudice and power, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Seriously, drop your city or country in the comments below. Are you watching from New York, London, Tokyo, Lagos? I love hearing from our global community. And while you're down there in the comments, tell me this. Have you ever been in a situation where someone judged you based on your appearance? Maybe you were dressed down at a fancy restaurant, or someone assumed you couldn't afford something because of how you looked. We've all been there, right? If you believe that dignity and respect shouldn't depend on designer clothes or status symbols, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It really does help us continue telling these important stories. And if you want to see justice served in the most spectacular way possible, stick around, because this story is about to take a turn that will absolutely blow your mind. You see, Captain Isabella Hartwell and Victoria Pemberton have just made assumptions about a woman based solely on her choice to dress comfortably for a long flight. They have no idea who Diana Mitchell really is. They have no idea what she's accomplished. And they certainly have no idea that the woman they're trying to humiliate owns the very airline they're flying on. But they're about to find out. Trust me when I tell you that what happens next will restore your faith in justice and remind you that sometimes karma doesn't just knock on the door. Sometimes karma owns the whole building. So stay with me because this story is just getting started, and I promise you the ending will give you chills in the best possible way. Diana Mitchell hadn't always been a billionaire. She hadn't always owned private jets or commanded billion-dollar acquisitions. 34 years ago, she was born in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit, Michigan, where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing and the dreams were big enough to drown out the noise. Her mother, Patricia Mitchell, worked double shifts at Ford Motor Company, coming home with oil under her fingernails and hope in her heart. Patricia had dropped out of high school when she became pregnant with Diana, but she was determined that her daughter would have every opportunity that had been denied to her. "Education is the one thing they can't take away from you," Patricia would say, helping 8-year-old Diana with her homework at their small kitchen table while eating dinner from paper plates because they couldn't afford a dishwasher. "No matter what happens in this world, no matter what people say about you or how they try to make you feel small, knowledge is yours to keep." Diana took those words to heart. While other kids were outside playing, Diana was inside reading devouring books from the Detroit Public Library with the hunger of someone who understood that every page was a step toward a different life. She read about science and technology, about business and innovation, about people who had started with nothing and built empires from dreams and determination. When Diana was 12, her mother saved enough money to buy a used computer, a clunky desktop machine that took 5 minutes to boot up and made sounds like a coffee grinder. Diana taught herself to code on that machine, staying up until midnight writing simple programs while her mother worked the overnight shift. "What are you buildings in there?" Patricia would ask when she came home at dawn to find Diana still at the computer. The future Mama Diana would answer, and Patricia would kiss her forehead and believe it. Diana graduated valedictorian from Cass Technical High School, earning a full scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She was 17 when she left Detroit, carrying everything she owned in 2 suitcases and a heart full of her mother's dreams. MIT was a culture shock. Diana found herself surrounded by students whose families had attended Ivy League schools for generations, whose trust funds exceeded what her mother earned in a decade, who spoke casually about vacation homes and European summers, as if these things were as common as breakfast. But Diana also found herself surrounded by brilliance. She studied computer science and artificial intelligence, spending 18-hour days in laboratories and libraries, absorbing everything she could about machine learning and logistics optimization. Her professors noticed her immediately, not just for her intelligence, but for her hunger, the way she approached every problem as if solving it might change the world. During her junior year, Diana noticed something that would change her life forever. She was working part-time in MIT's shipping and receiving department to help pay for textbooks when she realized how inefficient the logistics were. Packages arrived at random times, sat in warehouses for days, were shipped to wrong locations, and generally moved through the system with all the grace of a drunk elephant. Diana saw patterns where others saw chaos. She saw data where others saw problems. She saw solutions where others saw impossibilities. She spent her senior year developing an artificial intelligence platform that could predict shipping patterns, optimize delivery routes, and reduce costs by up to 40%. Her professors encouraged her to publish her research. Diana had a different idea. 2 weeks after graduation, in her mother's garage in Detroit, Diana Mitchell founded TechFlow Dynamics. She maxed out 3 credit cards, slept on an air mattress, and lived on ramen noodles for 8 months while she refined her platform and searched for investors. The first investor meeting was a disaster. Diana walked into a conference room full of middle-aged white men in expensive suits, pitched her revolutionary logistics platform, and watched their eyes glaze over. The moment she opened her mouth. They asked her if she had any experience in business, if she understood the complexity of international shipping, if she was sure she wouldn't be happier working for someone else's company. Diana left that meeting with no money, but with absolute clarity about what she was facing. It wasn't enough to be brilliant. It wasn't enough to have the best product. She was going to have to be undeniable. The second investor meeting was at a coffee shop with Maria Santos, a Latina venture capitalist who had built her own firm after being passed over for partnerships at 3 different companies. Maria listened to Diana's pitch, asked tough questions about scalability and market penetration, and then wrote a check for $50,000. "I'm not investing in your algorithm," Maria told Diana as she signed the check. "I'm investing in your refusal to quit." That $50,000 became $5 million in Series A funding. $5 million became $50 million in Series B. $50 million became $500 million when Amazon licensed Diana's platform for their logistics network. By the time Diana was 30, TechFlow Dynamics was valued at $2 billion. By 35, it was worth $8 billion. Today, at 42, Diana Mitchell was worth $12 billion, owned homes on 3 continents, and employed over 15,000 people worldwide. But she still shopped for her own groceries. She still flew commercial airlines. She still remembered what it felt like to count pennies for bus fare. And she never ever forgot her mother's words about education being the one thing they couldn't take away. Patricia Mitchell had died 3 years ago, cancer taking her before she could see Diana ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. But Diana carried her mother's voice with her everywhere, especially on days like today when people looked at her comfortable clothes and made assumptions about her worth. Captain Isabella Hartwell had never known hunger. She had never counted pennies for anything. She had never been told she didn't belong somewhere, and she had certainly never been questioned about her right to occupy the spaces she filled. Isabella was born into Connecticut privilege, the kind of old money wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Her great-grandfather had been an aviation pioneer flying mail routes in the 1920s and eventually founding Hartwell Aviation, a private aircraft company that served the wealthy families of the Northeast. Her grandfather expanded the business, buying commercial routes and building Hartwell into a respected regional airline before selling to a larger carrier in the 1980s for a fortune that set up the family for generations. Her father chose medicine over aviation, becoming a renowned cardiac surgeon, but Isabella had aviation fuel in her blood. She learned to fly before she learned to drive, taking lessons at the family's private airstrip in the Hamptons. By 16, she had her private pilot's license. By 18, she had her commercial license. By 25, she was a captain for Northeast Airways, the youngest woman ever to achieve that rank at the company. Isabella had worked hard for her position. There was no question about that. She had logged thousands of flight hours, passed rigorous examinations, and demonstrated the kind of skill and knowledge that kept passengers safe at 35,000 feet. She took pride in her professionalism, her attention to detail, and her ability to command respect in a male-dominated industry. But Isabella had also never worked hard for acceptance. She had never been questioned about her qualifications because of her appearance. She had never been assumed to be in the wrong place because of her background. She had never had to prove that she belonged in the cockpit, because people like her had always belonged in cockpits. This unconscious privilege had shaped Isabella's worldview in subtle but profound ways. She genuinely believed that success was simply a matter of effort and ability, that people who failed to achieve their goals must be lacking in one or both areas. She looked at the world and saw a meritocracy, not because she was naive, but because the system had always worked for her exactly as it was supposed to. In Isabella's mind, aviation was about maintaining standards. Passengers in first class paid premium prices for premium service, and part of that service was ensuring that the cabin maintained an atmosphere of exclusivity and refinement. When she saw Diana Mitchell in casual clothes boarding her aircraft, she didn't see discrimination in her own reaction. She saw quality control. Isabella had flown celebrities, politicians, business leaders, and foreign dignitaries. In her experience, people with the money to afford first-class tickets dressed the part. They understood that they were participating in a certain kind of theater where appearance mattered as much as payment. When Diana failed to meet those expectations, Isabella's training took over, but it wasn't the kind of training she had received in flight school. It was the kind of training that came from 38 years of living in a world that had always confirmed her assumptions about how things should work. Isabella genuinely believed she was protecting the integrity of her aircraft and the comfort of her passengers. She didn't see herself as prejudiced because she had never been forced to examine her own biases. She was simply doing her job the way she had always done it, maintaining the standards that had served her well throughout her career. What Isabella couldn't see, what her privilege had made invisible to her, was that those standards had been designed by and for people who looked exactly like her. She couldn't recognize discrimination when she was the one practicing it, because in her world it simply looked like normal business. Victoria Pemberton represented old money in its purest form. Her great-great-grandfather had made his fortune in railroads during the Gilded Age, and successive generations had carefully cultivated and preserved that wealth through strategic marriages, conservative investments, and an unwavering commitment to maintaining their position in society's upper echelons. At 55, Victoria served on the boards of 3 museums, 2 universities, and a private foundation that awarded scholarships to deserving students. She lived in a Fifth Avenue apartment that had been in her family for 60 years, summered in the Hamptons, and wintered in Palm Beach. Her idea of roughing it was staying at a 4-star hotel instead of a 5-star resort. Victoria had never worked a day in her life, but she was constantly busy with charity galas, board meetings, and social events that reinforced her sense of purpose and importance. She genuinely believed that she contributed to society through her philanthropic efforts, and she saw herself as someone who used her privilege responsibly. But Victoria's generosity came with conditions. She believed in helping people who were grateful, who understood their place, who didn't challenge the existing order that had allowed her to maintain her position. When she encountered someone like Diana who refused to apologize for her appearance or defer to Victoria's assumptions, It threatened her entire worldview. Senator James Blackwood was a different kind of privileged. Where Victoria's wealth was inherited, James had built his fortune through a combination of political connections, strategic investments, and an uncanny ability to be on the right side of every major political shift for the past 3 decades. At 62, James had served in the Senate for 18 years, building a reputation as a moderate Republican who could work across the aisle when it served his interests. He was a frequent flyer, traveling constantly between his home state of Tennessee, Washington, D.C., and various international locations where American business interests needed cultivation. James expected special treatment wherever he went, not because he was inherently entitled, but because he had learned that demanding respect was often the fastest way to receive it. He had spent decades in environments where status mattered more than substance, where the right connections could open any door, where problems could be solved with a phone call to the right person. When James looked at Diana, he saw someone who was clearly out of place, and his instinct was to correct the situation in the most efficient way possible. It wasn't personal. It was simply the way his world worked. Sophia Martinez was everything the others were not. At 24, she was a senior at Florida International University, majoring in business administration, while working 2 part-time jobs to pay for her education. She had grown up in Miami's Little Havana, the daughter of Cuban immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities they had never had. Sophia understood discrimination in a way that Victoria and Isabella never could because she had lived it. She had been followed around stores by security guards, questioned about her ability to pay for items she was purchasing, and assumed to be someone's maid when she attended formal events in service positions to help pay for school. When Sophia saw what was happening to Diana, she recognized it immediately. She pulled out her phone not because she wanted to go viral, but because she understood that sometimes the only way to fight injustice was to make it visible. Michael Torres owned a small landscaping business in Coral Gables, built from a single truck and a willingness to work 16-hour days. At 28, he employed 6 people and was proud of what he had accomplished, but he had never forgotten what it felt like to be underestimated. Michael was flying to London to meet with potential clients for a major commercial project, the kind of opportunity that could transform his business. He was wearing his best suit and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who belonged in first class, but he remembered when that wasn't the case. When he saw Diana being harassed, Michael felt the familiar anger that came from watching someone else experience the judgment he had faced countless times. He started live streaming not for attention, but for accountability. Sky Vista Airlines had built its reputation on exclusivity and premium service. Founded in 1987 by aviation entrepreneur Robert Sterling, the airline catered specifically to wealthy travelers who valued privacy, luxury, and personalized attention over price competition. Sky Vista's fleet consisted of wide-body aircraft configured with more first-class seats and fewer economy seats than any major carrier. Their marketing emphasized the airline's commitment to maintaining the highest standards of service and sophistication language that attracted exactly the kind of passengers who valued exclusivity above all else. Flight SK447 was one of Sky Vista's flagship routes, a daily service between Miami and London that carried business executives, wealthy tourists, and government officials across the Atlantic in style. The Boeing 777 was configured with 36 first-class seats, 48 business-class seats, and only 96 economy seats, a ratio that ensured premium passengers never felt crowded. The aircraft itself was a technological marvel equipped with the latest entertainment systems, communication equipment, and safety features. Each first-class seat converted into a fully flat bed with direct aisle access, personal storage space, and enough privacy to conduct business calls or sleep comfortably during the 7-hour flight. Diana had chosen this flight specifically because she wanted to experience Sky Vista's service firsthand. Having just completed the acquisition of the airline, she planned to use the flight time to review operational reports and begin planning the changes she wanted to implement. What Diana found instead was a culture of casual discrimination disguised as premium service, a place where maintaining standards had become code for maintaining barriers, where paying for a seat wasn't enough if you didn't look like you belonged. The irony was that Diana not only belonged on the aircraft, she owned it. Every seat, every meal, every smile from the flight crew was now part of her business empire. But none of them knew that yet, and their treatment of her revealed everything she needed to know about the culture she had just inherited. Isabella stepped away from Diana's seat with the purposeful stride of someone who had decided to escalate a situation rather than resolve it. She moved toward the aircraft phone mounted near the galley, her movements watched by every passenger in the first-class cabin. Diana remained in her seat, her hands folded calmly in her lap, but her mind was racing. She had been through discrimination before, but this felt different. This was her airline now, her employee, her customer experience. Every slight, every assumption, every microaggression was happening on her property to her passengers under her corporate umbrella. Isabella picked up the phone and spoke in low, urgent tones, but the cabin was quiet enough that her words carried clearly to the surrounding seats. "Security to gate 12, please. We have a potential irregularity with a passenger manifest. I need verification on a first-class boarding." She paused, glancing toward Diana. "Yes, possible fraudulent documentation. I'll need someone to come aboard and verify identity and payment method." The word fraudulent hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Conversations that had been whispered suddenly stopped altogether. Victoria Pemberton's eyes widened with satisfaction as if her suspicions had been confirmed. Other passengers shifted in their seats, some craning their necks to get a better view of the woman who was apparently causing such a serious security concern. Diana felt the weight of their stares, but kept her expression neutral. She pulled out her phone and checked the time. The departure was scheduled for 2:30 p.m. It was now 2:15. In her experience, airlines rarely delayed departures for passenger disputes unless there was a genuine security threat. Isabella was either supremely confident in her assessment or supremely arrogant in her authority. 3 minutes later, 2 airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door. Diana could see them through the first-class cabin, both men in uniform with serious expressions and the kind of body language that suggested they were prepared for trouble. Isabella met them at the entrance to first class, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing in Diana's direction. Diana couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see the officer's reaction's initial attention that gradually shifted to confusion as Isabella explained whatever she thought the problem was. One of the officers, a tall Hispanic man with sergeant's stripes, approached Diana's seat. His nameplate read Ramirez, and his expression was professional but skeptical. "Ma'am," he said politely, "I'm Sergeant Ramirez with Airport Security. The captain has expressed some concerns about your travel documents. Could you show me your boarding pass and identification, please?" Diana handed over her driver's license and boarding pass without comment. Sergeant Ramirez examined them carefully, comparing the photo on the license to Diana's face, checking the boarding pass details against something on his phone. "Is this your credit card that purchased the ticket?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was going through motions rather than conducting a genuine investigation. Diana produced her black Centurion card. Ramirez examined it, noting that the name matched her license and boarding pass perfectly. "Ma'am, everything appears to be in order," he said loud enough for Isabella and the surrounding passengers to hear. "Your documents are legitimate, your ticket is valid, and your seat assignment is confirmed." He turned to Isabella. "Captain, I'm not seeing any irregularities here." Isabella's jaw tightened. "Sergeant, I've been flying for 20 years. I know when something doesn't look right. This woman is clearly not our typical first-class passenger." "What exactly does that mean?" Sergeant Ramirez asked, his voice taking on a sharper edge. Isabella glanced around the cabin, suddenly aware that she had an audience for whatever explanation she was about to give. "I mean that first-class passengers typically dress appropriately for the experience. They understand that they're representing a certain level of sophistication and refinement." "So this is about her clothing?" Ramirez asked. "This is about maintaining standards," Isabella said, her voice rising slightly. "When passengers pay premium prices for premium service, they have a right to expect a premium environment." Diana stood up slowly, her movement causing both officers to take a step back. She was tall and imposing, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms and managing billion-dollar negotiations. "Officer," she said to Ramirez, "I paid full price for this seat. I have valid identification and a legitimate boarding pass. Are there any laws that require passengers to dress according to the captain's personal preferences? Ramirez shook his head. No, ma'am, there are not. Then I would like to take my seat and prepare for departure, Diana said. Unless the captain is planning to delay this flight over her opinions about my fashion choices. The second security officer, a younger white man who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Ma'am, sometimes it's easier to just cooperate with crew requests. Maybe there's another seat available that would work for everyone. Diana turned her full attention to him, and he actually took a step backward. Officer, are you suggesting that I give up a seat I paid for because the captain doesn't like how I dress? I'm just saying that sometimes flexibility helps everyone, he stammered. I am flexible, Diana said coldly. I'm flexible enough to dress comfortably for a 7-hour flight. I'm flexible enough to ignore the stares and whispers from other passengers. I'm flexible enough to be polite to a captain who has accused me of fraud without evidence. What I'm not flexible about is my right to occupy a seat that I purchased legally. Sergeant Ramirez closed his notebook. Ma'am, you have every right to that seat. Captain, unless you have specific evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you allow this passenger to board and prepare for departure. Isabella looked around the cabin, realizing that she had created a scene that was far bigger than she had intended. Other passengers were openly staring now, some taking pictures with their phones, others whispering urgently to traveling companions. What had started as a simple assertion of authority had become a public confrontation. Fine, Isabella said, her voice tight with frustration. But I want it noted in the flight record that I expressed concerns about this passenger. Those concerns are noted, Ramirez said dryly, and dismissed. As the security officers left the aircraft, the tension in the first-class cabin reached a boiling point. The confrontation had lasted nearly 15 minutes, and every passenger had been forced to choose sides whether they wanted to or not. Victoria Pemberton was the first to speak up after the officers departed. Well, she said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear, I certainly hope this isn't an indication of declining standards. I mean, if anyone can just walk into first class wearing workout clothes. What exactly are we paying for? Her traveling companion, an elderly man with the kind of mustache that suggested membership in exclusive clubs, nodded emphatically. Absolutely right, Victoria. There are certain expectations in first class, certain standards. From seat 3A, a woman with perfectly styled silver hair and jewelry that caught the cabin light like stars spoke up. I have to agree. I travel first class specifically to avoid these kinds of situations. Diana felt the familiar burn of being discussed as if she weren't there, as if her presence were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. She had experienced this in boardrooms, at conferences, in restaurants, and now apparently on aircraft that she happened to own. But before Diana could respond, a voice from the back of the first-class section cut through the murmur of agreement. Excuse me, but what exactly is the situation here? It was a man in his 40s, well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so, with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he was accustomed to being listened to. Because from what I just witnessed, a passenger with a valid ticket was harassed by crew and questioned by security for no apparent reason other than her choice of clothing. Victoria turned in her seat to face him. And you are Dr. James Patterson, the man said calmly, cardiothoracic surgeon. And I'm confused about what standards we're supposedly maintaining here, because I was under the impression that the standard for flying first class was being able to afford a first-class ticket. Well, obviously, Victoria said, flustered. But there are also standards of dress, standards of behavior, standards of what Dr. Patterson interrupted. Standards of appearance. Standards of conformity. Standards that ensure everyone looks and acts exactly like you expect them to. The cabin erupted into competing conversations. Some passengers clearly agreed with Victoria, muttering about declining standards and inappropriate behavior. Others seemed uncomfortable with the direction the discussion was taking, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. A businessman in seat 5B, his expensive watch glinting as he gestured, decided to join Victoria's side of the argument. Look, I'm not trying to be discriminatory here, but when I pay $3,000 for a first-class seat, I expect a certain atmosphere. I expect to be surrounded by other people who understand what first class represents. "And what does it represent?" Diana asked, speaking for the first time since the security officers had left. The businessman looked directly at her, and she could see him calculating his response, trying to find words that would express his feelings without making him sound openly prejudiced. "It represents success," he said finally. "It represents achievement. It represents people who have worked hard and earned the right to premium accommodations." "I see," Diana said. "And you've determined that I haven't worked hard or achieved success based on what exactly?" The businessman's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He had walked directly into the trap of his own assumptions, and he knew it. Victoria, however, was not finished. "Darling," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I think what everyone is trying to say is that first class has certain expectations. People dress appropriately. They behave appropriately. They understand that they're part of an exclusive experience." "Exclusive to whom?" Diana asked. "To people who belong here," Victoria said, the mask slipping entirely. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Victoria had said what everyone was thinking but had been afraid to articulate. The subtext had become text, and there was no taking it back. Dr. Patterson shook his head in disgust. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Absolutely unbelievable." From the middle of the cabin, a woman with a slight accent spoke up. "I am Dr. Priya Patel, and I am frankly appalled by what I am hearing. This woman has shown more grace and dignity in the past 15 minutes than the rest of you have shown in your entire conversation." But Victoria was undeterred. "Look, I'm not racist," she said, apparently unaware of how those words always preceded something racist. "I have friends who are black. I support diversity. But there's a difference between inclusion and just letting anyone go anywhere regardless of whether they fit in." "Fit in how?" Dr. Patel pressed. Victoria looked around the cabin for support, but found most passengers now staring at their phones or out the windows, unwilling to be associated with the conversation she had started. "You know what I mean?" Victoria said weakly. "No," Diana said, standing up again. "I don't know what you mean. Why don't you explain it to all of us?" Before Victoria could respond, the cabin door opened and Senator James Blackwood appeared, slightly out of breath and clearly agitated. He was followed by a young aide carrying his luggage and a flight attendant from the gate who was trying to manage what was obviously a last-minute boarding situation. Isabella immediately moved to greet the senator, her demeanor shifting from frustrated authority to deferential service in an instant. "Senator Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Captain Hartwell. I'm so sorry about the delay. I understand there was an issue with your original booking." The senator, a distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that came from decades in public office, nodded grimly. "Complete disaster. My assistant booked me on United, but there was an equipment change and they downgraded me to business class." "Business class. Can you imagine? I have meetings in London tomorrow that could affect international trade policy, and they wanted me to fly in business class like some junior staffer." "Of course," Senator Isabella said sympathetically. "We'll find a solution. First class is fully booked, but I'm sure we can make arrangements." Diana watched this exchange with growing incredulity. The same captain who had spent 15 minutes questioning her right to occupy a seat she had paid for was now promising to find accommodations for a passenger who didn't even have a reservation. The senator's eyes swept the first-class cabin, taking in the 16 occupied seats. "Surely someone would be willing to volunteer to move to business class. I'd be happy to compensate them for the inconvenience." His gaze lingered on Diana, and she could see the calculation in his eyes. He was looking for the passenger who would be easiest to displace, the one with the least power to resist the one who looked like they might not really belong there in the first place. "Actually," Isabella said, following the senator's gaze, "we do have one passenger whose travel arrangements have been irregular. Perhaps we could resolve both situations at once." The senator looked at Diana with new interest. "Irregular how?" "Well," Isabella said, lowering her voice, but not enough to keep her words from carrying throughout the cabin. "There have been questions about documentation, about whether the reservation was legitimate, about whether the passenger really understands the expectations of first-class travel." Diana felt something shift inside her chest, a cold anger that started in her stomach and spread outward like ice water in her veins. She had been patient with the assumptions, polite in the face of discrimination, gracious despite the humiliation. but now they were actively conspiring to remove her from a seat she had purchased so that a politician who hadn't even paid could take her place. "I see," the senator said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to having his problems solved by other people. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Diana directly, "for the first time I understand there may have been some confusion about your reservation. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement that would benefit everyone." Diana looked at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the ordeal, but behind her eyes something had crystallized. "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind, Senator?" "Well," he said, encouraged by her seemingly reasonable tone, "I'd be happy to cover the cost of upgrading you to business class plus a voucher for future travel. It would actually be a significant improvement in value for you, and it would help me resolve a rather urgent scheduling conflict." "I see," Diana said. "And why should I give up my seat for you?" The senator looked surprised by the question, as if the answer were obvious. "Because I'm a United States senator, and I have urgent government business in London. Surely you can understand that some passengers have more pressing needs than others." More pressing than what Diana asked. "Then," the senator gestured vaguely at Diana, "whatever it is you're traveling for." Victoria Pemberton chose this moment to insert herself back into the conversation. "Senator, I'm Victoria Pemberton. My late husband was Charles Pemberton of Pemberton Industries. I completely understand your situation, and I think your suggestion is more than fair. Some passengers are simply more important than others." Dr. Patterson stood up abruptly. "This is absolutely disgraceful," he said loudly. "You're asking a paying passenger to give up her seat to someone who doesn't even have a reservation, and you're justifying it by claiming that his needs are more important than hers based on his job title." "Based on his service to the country," Victoria corrected. "Based on his sense of entitlement," Dr. Patterson shot back. The cabin was now divided into clear factions. Victoria, the senator, and several other passengers who seemed to believe that hierarchy and status should determine seating arrangements. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Patel, and a handful of others who recognized discrimination when they saw it. And a large group in the middle who were trying to become invisible, hoping the confrontation would resolve itself without requiring them to take a position. Isabella looked at Diana expectantly as if the solution were obvious, and Diana was simply being stubborn by not accepting it. "Ma'am," Isabella said, "the senator has made a very generous offer. I really think it would be in everyone's best interest if you would consider it." Diana was quiet for a long moment, looking from Isabella to the senator to Victoria, taking in their expectant faces and confident postures. They were all so certain that she would eventually give in, that their combined authority and social pressure would convince her to accept their definition of her place. They had no idea that they were asking the owner of the airline to give up her seat to accommodate their prejudices. "No," Diana said simply. The word fell into the cabin like a stone into still water, creating ripples of shock and confusion. "I'm sorry," Isabella said. "I said no," Diana repeated. "I will not give up my seat. Not for a voucher, not for an upgrade, not for a senator, and certainly not to make any of you more comfortable with your own bigotry." The tension in the cabin had reached a breaking point. Senator Blackwood's face flushed red with indignation. Victoria Pemberton looked as if she had been personally insulted, and Isabella appeared to be calculating her next move in what had become an increasingly public confrontation. That's when Sophia Martinez, who had been sitting quietly in seat 7A throughout the entire ordeal, pulled out her phone and started recording. Sophia was a 24-year-old business major at Florida International University, flying to London for a study abroad program that she had saved for 2 years to afford. She had grown up in Miami's Little Havana, the daughter of Cuban immigrants who had taught her to recognize injustice and speak up against it, even when speaking up was uncomfortable. Sophia had watched the entire confrontation unfold with growing anger and disbelief. She had seen discrimination before, had experienced it herself, but never so blatantly, never so publicly, never with such a clear line between the aggressors and the victim. When Diana refused to give up her seat and the tension in the cabin became palpable, Sophia knew she had to document what was happening. Not for fame, not for viral content, but because sometimes the only way to fight injustice was to make it visible. She started recording, discreetly holding her phone low and angling it toward the front of the cabin where Diana sat, surrounded by hostile passengers and an increasingly aggressive crew. "This is absolutely insane," Sophia whispered to her phone, providing narration for what she was capturing. "I'm on Sky Vista Flight 447 from Miami to London, and I'm watching a black woman get harassed by the captain and other passengers for wearing comfortable clothes in first class. She has a valid ticket, she passed security screening, but they want her to give up her seat for a senator who doesn't even have a reservation, 3 rows behind Sophia." Michael Torres was having the same reaction. Michael owned a small but successful landscaping business in Coral Gables, and he was flying to London to meet with potential clients for a major commercial project. He had worked 16-hour days for 5 years to build his business to the point where he could afford first-class international travel, and he understood exactly what Diana was experiencing. Michael pulled out his phone and opened Facebook Live, something he rarely used but felt compelled to access now. "Hey everyone," he said quietly to his phone. "I'm on a flight right now, and I'm watching something that you need to see. There's a woman here, a black woman, who bought a first-class ticket just like the rest of us. But the captain and some passengers are trying to get her to move because they don't think she belongs here." Michael's live stream immediately started attracting viewers. His followers, mostly small business owners and entrepreneurs from the Miami area, began commenting in real time. "Are you serious right now?" appeared in the chat. "This is 2024, not 1954. Get their names and report them. Are you recording this?" The comments poured in faster than Michael could read them, and he realized that his live stream was being shared beyond his immediate followers. The viewer count was climbing rapidly, 50 viewers, then 100, then 200. Meanwhile, Sophia's TikTok video was experiencing its own viral explosion. She had posted it with the hashtags Discrimination Airplane Sky Vista Justice, and it was already being shared across multiple platforms. The comments on Sophia's video were immediate and passionate. "This is disgusting. What year is this? I will never fly Sky Vista again. Someone needs to identify these people. Where are the other passengers? Why isn't anyone helping her? She's handling this with more grace than I would." Both Sophia and Michael noticed something interesting happening in their comments sections. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination, their own experiences of being judged or excluded based on their appearance, their own moments of witnessing injustice and wondering whether they should speak up. Dr. Patterson, who had been one of the few passengers to defend Diana verbally, noticed the phones and the recording and felt a mix of relief and vindication. Finally, this appalling behavior was being documented. Finally, there would be consequences for the discrimination he was witnessing. Isabella noticed the recording too, but it only seemed to make her more defensive rather than more cautious. "Passengers are not allowed to record during boarding procedures," she announced loudly. "Please put your phones away immediately." Actually, Dr. Patterson said passengers are absolutely allowed to record in public spaces unless there are specific safety concerns. This is a public accommodation, and these passengers have every right to document what they're witnessing. Sophia looked up from her phone. "I'm recording because I'm watching discrimination happen in real time, and I think people need to see this." Michael nodded from his seat. "I'm live streaming because this woman deserves to have witnesses to what's being done to her." Isabella's jaw tightened. She was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. What had started as a simple assertion of authority had become a public relations disaster, and it was being broadcast live to hundreds of people on social media. The senator, meanwhile, was beginning to realize that his presence in this confrontation might not be politically wise. Perhaps he said diplomatically, "There's been a misunderstanding. Maybe I should just wait for the next flight." But it was too late for retreat. The damage was done, the lines were drawn, and the internet was watching. Sophia's video had been shared over 1,000 times in less than 10 minutes. Michael's live stream had attracted over 500 viewers and was climbing. Other passengers were now pulling out their phones, some to record the confrontation, others to share their own real-time updates on Twitter and Instagram. The hashtag SkyVistaDiscrimination was beginning to trend. Comments flooded in from people around the world who were watching the situation unfold. "This is heartbreaking to watch. She's showing incredible dignity in the face of obvious racism. I hope someone is getting the names of everyone involved. This captain should be fired immediately. What's the woman's name? She deserves our support." But the most prescient comment came from someone watching Michael's live stream. Plot twist. What if she's someone really important and they just don't know it? That comment would prove to be more accurate than anyone could have imagined. Diana sat quietly in her seat throughout the escalating social media storm, aware that she was being recorded but not concerned about it. She had spent her entire career in the public eye, and she understood the power of documentation in fighting discrimination. What the passengers recording her didn't know was that Diana had her own documentation system running. As the owner of TechFlow Dynamics, she carried a small device that automatically recorded conversations for business purposes. Every word spoken during the confrontation was being captured in high-quality audio, time-stamped and stored in encrypted cloud servers. But more importantly, Diana was mentally cataloging every employee behavior, every policy failure, every cultural problem that was being revealed by this incident. She was conducting the most comprehensive customer service audit in aviation history, and her own employees had no idea they were being evaluated by their new owner. The irony was perfect. In their attempt to exclude her, they were providing her with exactly the information she needed to transform their airline. And transformation was coming whether they were ready for it or not. Sofia Martinez's TikTok video exploded across social media like wildfire in a drought. Within 15 minutes of posting, it had accumulated over 50,000 views and was being shared at a rate that made her phone buzz continuously with notifications. The video was raw and authentic in a way that resonated immediately with viewers. Sophia's whispered commentary captured the shock and disbelief of watching discrimination unfold in real time. This is actually happening right now. They're trying to make her give up her seat because she doesn't look like what they think a first-class passenger should look like. The comments section became a forum for people to share their own experiences with discrimination. This happened to me at a restaurant in Nashville. They seated the white couple who came in after me first. I was questioned about my credit card at Nordstrom last week. The card worked fine, but they still made me show 3 forms of ID. My mom was followed around Target by security for an hour. She was shopping for my birthday party. This is why I record everything when I travel now. The video was being shared across platforms. Instagram users were reposting it in their stories with fire and angry face emojis. Twitter users were tweeting it with commentary about the persistence of discrimination in spaces that should be accessible to everyone who could afford them. On LinkedIn, business professionals were sharing the video with discussions about corporate culture and customer service training. The conversation was spreading beyond social media into professional networks and industry groups. Meanwhile, Michael Torres's Facebook live stream was drawing an entirely different but equally engaged audience. His viewers were primarily small business owners, entrepreneurs, and working professionals who understood the significance of someone being judged based on their appearance rather than their ability to pay. Y'all, this is exactly what we talk about when we talk about unconscious bias, Michael said to his audience while still recording the confrontation. This woman has done nothing wrong. She has a valid ticket. She's been polite. She's followed all the rules. But because she doesn't look like what they expect a first-class passenger to look like, they're treating her like she's a criminal. The comments on Michael's live stream were flowing too fast for him to read. Michael, please get their names. This needs to be reported. I'm calling Sky Vista customer service right now. Someone needs to help her. Where is the crew that's supposed to protect passengers? This is why we need to support businesses that respect all customers. I'm never flying Sky Vista again after this. One comment caught Michael's attention. Bro, someone in the aviation subreddit just said that Sky Vista was just bought by some tech billionaire. Whoever that is, they need to see this video. Michael screenshot that comment, thinking it might be important later. The viral nature of the content was being amplified by the real-time aspect of the live stream. People were watching discrimination happen live, not learning about it after the fact through edited videos or news reports. The immediacy made it more powerful, more urgent, more impossible to dismiss or explain away. Aviation industry professionals were beginning to notice the trending hashtag #SkyVistaDiscrimination. Pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service representatives from other airlines were sharing the content with their own commentary about industry standards and customer service protocols. This is not how we treat passengers, wrote a Delta flight attendant. This captain is a disgrace to the uniform. 20 years flying, and I've never seen anything this blatant, commented a United pilot. This woman deserves an apology and compensation. As a gate agent, I can tell you that this is not standard protocol posted an American Airlines employee. Someone in Sky Vista management needs to see this immediately. The conversation was expanding beyond individual incidents of discrimination to broader discussions about airline industry culture, customer service training, and corporate accountability. Dr. James Patterson had seen enough. He stood up from his seat in row 4 and walked directly to Diana's row, positioning himself between her and the increasingly agitated Isabella. "Ma'am," he said to Diana, "I'm Dr. Patterson, and I want you to know that what's happening here is completely unacceptable. As a fellow passenger, I'm appalled by the treatment you've received, and I want you to know that not everyone on this aircraft agrees with what's being done to you." Diana looked up at him with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Patterson. I appreciate you speaking up." Dr. Patterson turned to address the cabin at large. "I've been sitting here listening to this conversation for the past 20 minutes, and I'm disgusted by what I'm hearing. This woman has a valid ticket, valid identification, and has conducted herself with more grace and dignity than anyone else in this cabin. The fact that some of you think she should give up her seat because a politician showed up without a reservation is absurd." Dr. Priya Patel, the physician who had spoken up earlier, rose from her seat to stand beside Dr. Patterson. "I absolutely agree," she said, her slight Indian accent adding gravity to her words. "What I am witnessing is discrimination, pure and simple. This woman has done nothing wrong, and the fact that she is being asked to justify her presence here is shameful." A third passenger, a woman in her 30s who had been quiet throughout the ordeal, finally found her voice. "I'm Sarah Kim, and I'm a civil rights attorney," she said, standing up from seat 8A. "What's happening here is potentially illegal discrimination based on race and appearance. Every person in this cabin who is witnessing this has an obligation to speak up." The cabin was now physically divided, with some passengers standing in support of Diana, while others remained seated, either in agreement with the discrimination or too uncomfortable to take a position. Isabella was beginning to realize that she had lost control not just of the boarding process, but of the entire narrative. Half the cabin was now actively opposing her actions. Social media was documenting everything, and the situation was escalating beyond her ability to manage. "This is still my aircraft," Isabella announced loudly, "and I have the authority to make decisions about passenger safety and comfort." Safety from what Dr. Patterson challenged. Comfort for whom? This passenger poses no safety risk, and the only people who seem uncomfortable are those who apparently can't handle sitting near someone who doesn't dress according to their personal preferences. Victoria Pemberton, who had been increasingly quiet as more passengers spoke up against her position, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. I pay for first class to avoid exactly this kind of situation. If airlines are just going to let anyone sit anywhere regardless of whether they belong there, then what's the point of having different classes of service?" "The point," Dr. Patel said coldly, "is that you pay for better seats, better food, and better service. You don't pay for the right to exclude people based on their appearance." Sophia Martinez, still recording, captured this exchange and whispered to her phone, "Now we're getting to the real issue. These people think they paid for the right to only sit next to people who look like them." Michael Torres, monitoring the comments on his live stream, shared what he was seeing with his viewers. "Y'all, the comments are blowing up. People are sharing their own stories, tagging airlines, demanding accountability. This is becoming something bigger than just one flight." Indeed, the hashtag Sky Vista discrimination was now trending nationally. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Travel bloggers were writing real-time articles about the incident. Aviation industry websites were publishing think pieces about customer service and discrimination. The story was taking on a life of its own, spreading far beyond the confines of the aircraft where it had originated. Isabella realized that she was facing a full passenger revolt and a social media disaster that was spinning completely out of her control. Rather than backing down, she decided to double down on her authority, making what would prove to be the final and most catastrophic mistake of her career. She walked back to Diana's seat, positioned herself in the aisle where everyone could see her, and spoke in a voice that carried throughout the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I am the captain of this aircraft, and I have the final authority over all matters relating to passenger safety, security, and the orderly operation of this flight. When I determine that a passenger situation is disruptive to the cabin environment, I have the right and the responsibility to take appropriate action." She turned to face Diana directly. "Ma'am, you have disrupted the boarding process, caused distress to other passengers, and created a situation that is affecting the safety and security of this aircraft. I am ordering you to accept the accommodation that has been offered to you, or I will have you removed from this aircraft." The cabin went completely silent. Even the passengers who had been supporting Victoria and the senator seemed shocked by Isabella's escalation. To publicly threaten to remove a passenger who had done nothing wrong except refuse to give up a seat she had paid for crossed a line that even they weren't comfortable with. Diana stood up slowly, rising to her full height. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but everyone in the cabin could hear the steel underneath the silk. "Captain Hartwell," she said, "I want to make sure I understand your position. You are threatening to have me removed from this aircraft because I refuse to give up a seat I purchased to accommodate a passenger who doesn't have a reservation, and you're justifying this action by claiming that my presence disrupts the cabin environment." "That's correct," Isabella said, apparently unaware that she was digging her own grave deeper with every word. "And this disruption is based on what exactly Diana asked." Isabella hesitated suddenly, aware that every word she was about to say was being recorded by multiple passengers and broadcast live to hundreds of people on social media. Based on the complaints from other passengers about the appropriateness of the situation is irregular," Isabella finished lamely. "The situation is irregular," Diana repeated. "Can you be more specific about what makes my situation irregular?" Isabella looked around the cabin for support, but found that even Victoria Pemberton was now avoiding eye contact. The weight of multiple phone cameras pointed in her direction was beginning to register. "You don't fit the profile of our typical first-class passenger," Isabella said finally. The words landed like a bomb in the cabin. There it was, the truth that everyone had been dancing around for the past 30 minutes. Isabella had just admitted on camera that she was discriminating against Diana based on her failure to fit the profile of what she expected first-class passengers to look like. Sophia Martinez nearly dropped her phone. Did she really just say that she whispered to her TikTok audience? Did the captain really just admit that she's discriminating against this woman because she doesn't fit a profile? Michael Torres was equally stunned. "Folks, you heard it yourselves," he said to his live stream. "The captain just admitted that this is about profiles and expectations, not about any actual airline policy or safety concern." Diana smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed exactly what they needed. "Thank you, Captain Hartwell," Diana said. "I think you've made your position perfectly clear." She pulled out her phone and for the first time since the confrontation began made a call. "Arthur," she said into the phone, speaking loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "It's Diana. I'm on our plane. Sky Vista Flight 447 from Miami to London." Isabella's eyes widened. "Our plane?" "Yes, our plane. I'm in seat 1A, and Captain Hartwell has just threatened to have me removed because I don't fit the profile of a typical first-class passenger." The cabin erupted into confused murmurs. "Our plane. What did that mean?" "Handle this immediately," Diana said into the phone. "And Arthur, I want a complete review of all customer service protocols, crew training programs, and discrimination policies. Effective immediately." She hung up and looked at Isabella, who was staring at her with dawning comprehension and growing horror. "Captain Hartwell, Diana said I believe you're about to receive a call." Isabella's radio crackled to life before Diana had even finished speaking. The voice that came through was sharp, urgent, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who was not accustomed to being ignored. "Flight 447. This is ground control. Captain Hartwell, you are directed to return to the gate immediately. Do not repeat. Do not proceed with departure. This is Priority Alpha." Isabella stared at her radio as if it had just spoken to her in a foreign language. Priority Alpha was reserved for the most serious operational emergencies. Security threats, mechanical failures, medical emergencies that required immediate medical intervention. She had never heard Priority Alpha issued for a passenger dispute. "Ground control. This is Flight 447. We have a minor passenger situation that we can resolve without returning to gate. Request permission to proceed with departure. The radio was silent for a moment, then crackled back to life with even more urgency. Negative Flight 447, you are ordered to return to gate immediately. Captain Hartwell, you are to report to operations upon arrival at gate. This directive comes from Sky Vista Executive Management. Isabella's hand shook slightly as she keyed the radio. Ground control, can you clarify the nature of the operational issue? Another pause, then Captain Hartwell, new ownership has taken operational control of Sky Vista Airlines as of this morning. You are directed to report to the new management team immediately upon arrival at gate. This is not a request. The cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger was listening to the radio communication, and even those who didn't fully understand aviation terminology could sense that something significant was happening. New ownership. What did that mean? And why was it relevant to their flight? Isabella looked around the cabin with growing confusion and the first stirrings of genuine fear. She had been flying for 20 years, and she had never heard of ownership changes affecting operational decisions in real time. Airlines were massive corporations with complex hierarchies and bureaucratic processes. Ownership changes happened in boardrooms over months, not on radio frequencies in minutes. But as she looked at Diana, who was sitting calmly in seat 1A, with the expression of someone waiting for inevitable consequences to unfold, Isabella began to understand that she had made a mistake that was far more serious than she had realized. Diana's phone rang. She answered it with the same calm composure she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Yes, Arthur," she said, speaking loudly enough for the cabin to hear every word. "I received your message. The captain has been directed to return to gate." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end of the phone. "No, I don't think termination is too extreme. In fact, I think it's exactly appropriate." Another pause. "Yes, I want a full investigation into crew training, passenger service protocols, and cultural sensitivity programs. This kind of discrimination is exactly what we discussed changing." The word termination hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Passengers looked at each other with confusion and growing excitement. Who was this woman who could apparently order terminations and investigations? Who was Arthur, and why was he taking orders from the passenger in the hoodie? Isabella was beginning to piece together what was happening, and the realization was hitting her like a physical blow. The timeline was becoming clear. Sky Vista Airlines had apparently been acquired that morning. Diana had mentioned our plane during her phone call. She was now discussing terminations and investigations with someone named Arthur, who was clearly in a position of authority. "Captain Hartwell," Diana said, hanging up the phone and looking directly at Isabella. "Would you like me to explain what's happening, or would you prefer to figure it out on your own?" Isabella's mouth was dry. Her palms were sweating, and she was beginning to understand that her 20-year career had just ended in the most public and humiliating way possible. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Diana stood up, rising to her full height, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who was accustomed to commanding billion-dollar enterprises and managing thousands of employees. Before Diana could answer Isabella's question, the aircraft's communication system came to life with a series of messages that made the magnitude of the situation crystal clear. "Flight 447, this is Sky Vista Operations. Please stand by for executive communication." The radio crackled with static, then a new voice came through, professional, crisp, and unmistakably authoritative. "Captain Hartwell, this is Arthur Pennyworth, Chief Operating Officer of TechFlow Dynamics and Acting CEO of Sky Vista Airlines. You are speaking to Ms. Diana Mitchell, founder and CEO of TechFlow Dynamics, and as of this morning, owner of Sky Vista Airlines." The cabin erupted into gasps, shocked murmurs, and the sound of passengers frantically typing on their phones. Some people were Googling Diana's name in real time, others were sharing updates on social media, and a few were simply staring at her with the stunned expression of people watching impossible things happen in real time. Arthur's voice continued through the radio. "Ms. Mitchell is conducting an operational assessment of customer service protocols on her first flight as airline owner. Your treatment of Ms. Mitchell and your comments regarding passenger profiles are being reviewed for immediate disciplinary action." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. She was looking at Diana Mitchell, billionaire, entrepreneur, tech industry pioneer, and now her boss, the woman she had just threatened to throw off an aircraft she owned. Furthermore, Arthur's voice continued. All crew members on Flight 447 are suspended pending investigation into discriminatory practices and customer service failures. First Officer Richards, you are directed to assume command of the aircraft and return to gate immediately. First Officer David Richards, who had been in the cockpit throughout the entire ordeal, appeared at the cockpit door with the expression of someone trying to process impossible information. He looked from Isabella to Diana, then back to Isabella. "Captain," he said quietly, "I need to take command of the aircraft." Isabella's legs felt weak. She was watching her career end in real time in front of a cabin full of passengers while being broadcast live on social media to thousands of viewers. But the radio wasn't finished. "Attention passengers of Flight 447. This is Arthur Pennyworth, speaking on behalf of Sky Vista Airlines. We sincerely apologize for the delay and for the unacceptable treatment witnessed during boarding. Every passenger on this flight will receive full compensation for this experience, and we are implementing immediate changes to ensure this never happens again." Sofia Martinez was recording frantically, whispering updates to her TikTok audience. "You guys, this is insane. The woman they were trying to kick off the plane owns the airline. She literally owns the plane they were trying to throw her off of." Michael Torres was equally stunned, sharing the revelation with his Facebook Live audience plot twist of the century, y'all. The billionaire tech CEO just revealed herself and she owns the airline. Every single person who discriminated against her is about to face consequences. The comments on both social media streams were exploding faster than either could read. "Karma is real. Best plot twist ever. I can't believe this is happening in real time. That captain is done. Justice served at 30,000 feet. This is better than any movie." Diana walked to the center of the first-class cabin, positioning herself where every passenger could see her clearly. The woman who had been quiet and composed throughout 30 minutes of discrimination now commanded the space with the natural authority of someone accustomed to addressing boardrooms and commanding corporate empires. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the cabin, "I believe some introductions are in order." The cabin was absolutely silent. Even the passengers who had been hostile toward her were now listening with rapt attention, the power dynamics having shifted so completely that they were struggling to process what was happening. "My name is Diana Mitchell. I am the founder and CEO of TechFlow Dynamics, a logistics and artificial intelligence company based in Detroit. As of this morning, I am also the owner of Sky Vista Airlines." She paused, letting the information sink in. "I purchased this airline because I believe in the power of travel to connect people and create opportunities. I believe that airlines should serve all passengers with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, their background, or their choice of clothing." Victoria Pemberton was staring at Diana with the expression of someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. Senator Blackwood had gone pale and was apparently trying to become invisible in his seat. The passengers who had defended Diana were smiling with satisfaction, while those who had remained neutral were frantically Googling her name to confirm what they were hearing. "What you witnessed today," Diana continued, "is exactly the kind of discrimination and cultural problem that I intend to eliminate from this airline. Captain Hartwell's behavior, the assumptions made by some passengers, and the failure of other crew members to intervene represent everything that is wrong with customer service in the aviation industry." She turned to look directly at Isabella, who was standing near the cockpit door looking like she wanted to disappear into the aircraft structure. "Captain Hartwell, you threatened to remove a paying passenger from her seat because she didn't fit the profile of what you expected a first-class passenger to look like. You admitted on camera that your actions were based on discriminatory profiling. You collaborated with other passengers to try to pressure me into giving up my seat to accommodate someone who didn't even have a reservation." Isabella opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You did all of this," Diana continued, "while representing an airline that I now own. Your behavior today has shown me exactly what needs to change about this company's culture." She turned to address the cabin as a whole. "To the passengers who supported discrimination today, I want you to understand something. Dignity is not determined by designer clothing. Worth is not measured by appearance. Character is not defined by conformity to your expectations. Dr. Patterson started clapping, followed immediately by Dr. Patel, Sophia Martinez, Michael Torres, and several other passengers. The applause built throughout the cabin until even some of the passengers who had remained silent were joining in. Diana raised her hand to quiet the applause. To those of you who spoke up against what you witnessed, thank you. You demonstrated the kind of courage and character that makes travel better for everyone. Sophia Martinez, still recording, was crying as she whispered to her phone, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She turned their discrimination against them and used it to make the world a little bit better. Arthur Pennyworth's voice came through the aircraft's PA system one final time, and his words were crisp, professional, and utterly final. "Captain Isabella Hartwell, your employment with Sky Vista Airlines is terminated effective immediately. You are relieved of all duties and responsibilities. Security personnel will escort you from the aircraft upon return to gate." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. 20 years of flying thousands of hours in the cockpit, a spotless safety record, and it was all ending because she had tried to remove a passenger who didn't look like she belonged in first class. Except that passenger was now her former boss, and Isabella was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. "You can't do this," Isabella said, her voice shaking with shock and desperation. "I have seniority, I have contracts, I have union protection." Diana looked at her with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Captain Hartwell, you admitted to discriminatory passenger profiling on camera in front of witnesses while being live-streamed to thousands of people on social media. You threatened to remove a passenger from her legally purchased seat based solely on your personal opinions about how she looked. You collaborated with other passengers to pressure someone into giving up their accommodation to benefit someone who had no reservation." She paused, letting each point sink in. Any one of those actions would be grounds for termination. Together, they represent a pattern of behavior that is not only unacceptable but potentially illegal. Your union contract doesn't protect discrimination. First Officer David Richards, who had been standing quietly near the cockpit door, stepped forward. "Captain Hartwell, I need you to turn over your flight documentation and remove your personal items from the cockpit." Isabella looked around the cabin, desperately searching for some support, some sympathy, some indication that other people understood how unfair this was. But she found only uncomfortable stares, disappointed headshakes, and the satisfied expressions of passengers who had watched her dig her own grave with every discriminatory comment. "This is a misunderstanding," Isabella said, her voice becoming more desperate. "I was just trying to maintain standards. I was trying to ensure that our premium passengers had the experience they paid for." "What standards?" Diana asked. "What specific written policy requires first-class passengers to dress according to your personal preferences? What training manual teaches crew members to profile passengers based on their appearance? What company protocol allows captains to threaten paying customers with removal because they don't fit the profile?" Isabella's mouth opened and closed, but no answer came out. Because there was no answer. There was no policy, no training manual, no protocol that supported her behavior. What she had done was based entirely on prejudice disguised as professionalism. "The standards you were maintaining," Diana continued, "were your own biases and assumptions. Those are not airline standards. Those are personal prejudices, and they have no place in customer service." Airport security appeared at the aircraft door, clearly having been summoned by Arthur's communications. 2 officers, both professional and courteous, approached Isabella with the kind of respectful authority reserved for situations that needed to be handled carefully. "Ma'am, one of the officers said we need you to gather your personal belongings and come with us. This is administrative, not criminal, but you need to leave the aircraft immediately." Isabella looked at Diana one last time, and for a moment it seemed like she might apologize, might acknowledge the harm she had caused, might show some recognition of how wrong she had been. Instead, she said, "You'll regret this. This airline has standards, and without people like me to maintain them, you'll see what happens to your precious customer experience." Diana shook her head sadly. "Captain Hartwell, even now you don't understand what you've done wrong. That's exactly why this termination is necessary." Isabella was escorted off the aircraft to a smattering of applause from passengers who had witnessed her discriminatory behavior from beginning to end. Senator James Blackwood realized that he was in a precarious position. As a public official, his presence during a discrimination incident that was being broadcast live on social media could become a significant political liability. But as someone who had actively participated in trying to pressure Diana to give up her seat, he was also potentially complicit in the discrimination. The senator stood up and attempted to take control of the narrative. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used during committee hearings, "I appreciate that you're upset about your treatment, but I think you should be aware that airlines are regulated entities, and precipitous actions like firing employees without due process could result in federal investigations." Diana turned to face him with the expression of someone who was not impressed by political posturing. "Senator Blackwood," she said, "are you threatening me? I'm simply informing you that there are proper procedures for handling employment disputes, especially in regulated industries like aviation. Actions taken in anger often result in legal complications." Diana smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Senator, let me share some information that might help you understand your position. I own a logistics company that handles shipping contracts for several government agencies. My personal worth is approximately $12 billion, which means I employ more people in your home state than most major corporations. I donate to educational institutions, fund technology research, and support economic development initiatives that create jobs and drive innovation." She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. "I also have recordings of you pressuring me to give up my legally purchased seat to accommodate your lack of planning. I have video evidence of you collaborating with crew members to discriminate against a paying passenger. And I have all of this recorded and witnessed during an incident that is currently trending on social media." The senator's face had gone pale as Diana spoke, the political implications becoming clearer with each word. "So, Senator, if you would like to pursue a federal investigation into my business practices, I invite you to do so. But you should be aware that such an investigation would necessarily include a review of your own conduct during this incident, and I'm confident that the video evidence will be very illuminating for your constituents." Senator Blackwood sat down heavily, realizing that he had just made the second worst decision of the day. The worst decision belonged to Isabella, but his was a close second. Furthermore, Diana continued, "You boarded this aircraft without a valid reservation, attempted to pressure another passenger into giving up their seat for your convenience, and participated in what is now clearly documented discrimination. As the owner of this airline, I have the authority to deny you transportation on any future flights which I am now exercising." The senator looked around the cabin desperately but found no support. Even Victoria Pemberton, who had initially supported his request for Diana's seat, was now avoiding eye contact and clearly hoping to distance herself from the entire situation. "This is outrageous," the senator spluttered. "I am a United States senator. You cannot ban me from air travel." "I cannot ban you from all air travel," Diana corrected, "but I can absolutely ban you from my airline. And given that your behavior today was caught on camera and broadcast live to thousands of people, I suspect other airlines may also have concerns about your conduct." Sophia Martinez, still recording, whispered to her TikTok audience, "The senator just got destroyed. This woman is taking down everyone who discriminated against her." Michael Torres was equally amazed, telling his Facebook Live audience, "Y'all, this is the definition of consequences. Everyone who participated in this discrimination is facing immediate accountability." The cabin erupted into applause as the magnitude of what they had witnessed began to sink in. This wasn't just a story about discrimination and consequence. It was a story about justice being served in real time with dignity and precision. Dr. Patterson was the first to approach Diana. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "I want to apologize on behalf of the passengers who remained silent during your ordeal. What you experienced was unacceptable, and what you've done in response is remarkable." Diana shook his hand warmly. "Dr. Patterson, you didn't remain silent. You spoke up when speaking up was difficult, and that took courage. Thank you for your support." Dr. Priya Patel joined them. "Ms. Mitchell, as someone who has experienced similar discrimination, I want to thank you for not just standing up for yourself, but for using this moment to create lasting change. What you've done today will make travel better for countless people who come after you." Sophia Martinez approached cautiously, still holding her phone. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Sophia Martinez. I'm the one who recorded the video that's going viral. I want you to know that I didn't record it for fame or attention. I recorded it because I recognized what was happening to you and I thought people needed to see it. Diana took Sophia's hands in both of hers. Sophia, your courage in documenting what happened is the reason this discrimination won't be forgotten or dismissed. Your video has created accountability, and accountability is the first step toward change. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. Sophia started crying. I've experienced stuff like this before, but I never had the courage to record it or speak up. Watching you handle this with such dignity gave me strength. Michael Torres introduced himself next. Ms. Mitchell. I'm Michael Torres. I've been live streaming this entire incident to my business network. I want you to know that your response has inspired a lot of people who have faced similar discrimination, but never had the power to fight back effectively. Michael Diana said power isn't about money or position. Power is about refusing to accept being treated as less than you are. You had that power before you knew who I was, and your decision to document what happened proves that you're willing to use it to help others. Even some of the passengers who had initially supported the discrimination against Diana were now approaching to apologize. Ms. Mitchell said the businessman from seat 5B, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I was wrong. I supported behavior that I now realize was discriminatory, and I'm ashamed of my participation. Diana studied his face, looking for genuine remorse rather than calculated image management. She found what she was looking for. Apology accepted, she said. But I hope you'll remember this feeling the next time you see someone being discriminated against. Being a bystander to discrimination makes you complicit in it. Victoria Pemberton was the last to approach, and her apology was the most difficult to deliver and receive. Ms. Mitchell, she said, her voice shaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. I was wrong. I said things that were inappropriate and hurtful. I made assumptions about you that were based on prejudice, and I participated in behavior that was discriminatory. I'm sorry. Diana looked at Victoria for a long moment. This woman represented everything Diana had faced throughout her career. The assumption that success should look a certain way, that worthiness was determined by appearance, that some people naturally belonged in exclusive spaces while others did not. Mrs. Pemberton. Diana said finally, your apology means something because I believe you understand that what you did was wrong. But apologies are only the beginning. The question is, what will you do differently when you encounter this situation again? I don't know, Victoria said honestly, but I hope I'll remember how wrong I was today. Then something good will come from this, Diana said. Diana moved to the front of the first-class cabin and activated the aircraft's PA system. Her voice carried throughout the plane, reaching every passenger in first class, business class, and economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Diana Mitchell, your new airline owner. I want to address what happened during boarding today and share with you the changes that will be implemented immediately across all Sky Vista operations. The aircraft was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of ground equipment outside. What you witnessed today was discrimination disguised as customer service. A paying passenger was harassed, questioned, and threatened with removal, not because of any airline policy, but because she didn't meet someone's personal expectations about what a first-class passenger should look like. Diana paused, allowing her words to resonate throughout the cabin. This ends today, effective immediately. Sky Vista Airlines is implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. No passenger will ever again be questioned about their worthiness to occupy a seat they have purchased legally. No crew member will ever again be permitted to profile passengers based on their appearance, their clothing, their accent, or any other personal characteristic. Passengers throughout the aircraft began applauding the sound building from economy through business class and into first class. We are implementing mandatory bias training for every employee from ground crew to executive management. We are establishing an anonymous reporting structure that will allow passengers and employees to report discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation. We are creating passenger advocate positions at every major airport to ensure that customer service issues are resolved fairly and quickly. Sophia Martinez, still recording, whispered to her phone, "She's not just fixing what happened to her. She's fixing the whole structure." Most importantly, Diana continued, "We are changing our culture. Airlines exist to serve passengers. All passengers with dignity and respect. Luxury should be about comfort and service, not about exclusion and judgment. When you purchase a ticket on SkyVista Airlines, you are purchasing transportation, not approval from other passengers or crew members." The applause was sustained now, coming from throughout the aircraft. To the passengers who witnessed what happened today and spoke up against it, thank you for demonstrating the kind of character that makes travel better for everyone. To those who remained silent, I challenge you to find your voice the next time you witness injustice. To those who participated in discrimination, I hope today has taught you that actions have consequences. Arthur Pennyworth's voice came over the radio one final time. "Ms. Mitchell, I have updates on immediate personnel changes." "Go ahead, Arthur," Diana said, keying the radio so the entire aircraft could hear the conversation. "First Officer Richards has been promoted to captain and will assume command of this aircraft. Flight Attendant Emma Richardson, who attempted to intervene during the discrimination incident, has been promoted to lead flight attendant and will head our new Customer Service Excellence program." Emma Richardson, who had quietly tried to help Diana during the boarding process, stood up from her position in the galley. She was crying as passengers throughout the aircraft applauded her promotion. Additionally, Arthur continued, "We are establishing the Diana Mitchell Foundation for Travel Equality, which will provide scholarships for aviation education to underrepresented students and fund research into bias elimination in customer service." Diana smiled at hearing her name attached to the foundation, but she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with it. The foundation will also create a rapid response team for discrimination incidents in the travel industry, providing legal support and advocacy for passengers who experience what Ms. Mitchell experienced today. "Thank you," Arthur, Diana said. "Please also announce that every passenger on today's flight will receive a full refund of their ticket price, a voucher for future travel, and lifetime platinum status on SkyVista Airlines." The aircraft erupted into cheers and applause. Furthermore, Diana added, Mr. Michael Torres and Ms. Sophia Martinez, who documented today's incident, will serve as advisors to our customer service reform initiative. Their courage in speaking truth to power exemplifies the kind of character we want to embody as an airline. Michael and Sophia looked at each other in amazement. They had boarded the aircraft as passengers and were now being invited to help transform an entire airline's culture. "One final announcement," Diana said. "This aircraft will return to Miami, where passengers will be accommodated on alternative flights to their destinations with upgraded service. Today's experience will not define your travel, but it will define our commitment to ensuring it never happens again." As the aircraft prepared to return to the gate, Diana walked through the cabin, speaking personally with passengers who had been affected by the day's events. She stopped first at Sophia Martinez's seat. "Sophia, I want to thank you again for your courage. Your decision to document what happened created the accountability that made justice possible." Sophia was still crying, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had transpired. "Ms. Mitchell, I just want you to know that watching you handle this situation has changed how I think about standing up for myself and others. You didn't get angry, you didn't become defensive, you just remained dignified and let the truth speak for itself," Sophia, Diana said, sitting down in the empty seat next to her. "Dignity is a choice we make, not a privilege we earn. Every time someone tries to make you feel small, remember that your worth isn't determined by their opinions. You have the power to stand up for yourself and others, regardless of who they are or how much money they have." She moved on to Michael Torres, who was still processing the invitation to join her advisory committee. "Michael, your live stream didn't just document discrimination, it created community. People watching your broadcast felt connected to what was happening and compelled to speak up about their own experiences. That's the power of authentic communication." "Ms. Mitchell," Michael said, "I own a small business, and I faced discrimination from potential clients who made assumptions about me based on my appearance or my accent. Watching you turn this situation into something positive gives me hope that individual actions can create broader change." "Individual actions are the only thing that ever creates broader change," Diana replied. Structures don't change themselves. People change them one conversation, one decision, one act of courage at a time. Diana spent a few minutes with Dr. Patterson and Dr. Patel, thanking them for their willingness to speak up when speaking up was difficult. "The two of you demonstrated something important today," she told them. "You proved that being a bystander to discrimination is a choice, not an inevitability. People often say they don't speak up because they don't know what to say or they're afraid of making things worse. But you showed that simply bearing witness and naming what you see is powerful." Finally, Diana approached the passengers who had initially participated in or supported the discrimination against her. "I want you to know," she said to the group that included Victoria Pemberton and several others, "that I don't think you are bad people. I think you are people who acted on unconscious biases that our society has taught you to believe are normal or acceptable." Victoria looked up at her with genuine remorse. "Ms. Mitchell, how do we make sure we never do this again?" "By remembering this feeling," Diana said simply. "By remembering the shame of realizing you participated in someone else's humiliation. By committing to notice when your assumptions about people are based on their appearance rather than their character. By choosing to speak up the next time you see someone being treated unfairly." She paused, looking around at all of them. "And by recognizing that diversity isn't about tolerance. It's about recognizing that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. When airlines serve passengers from all backgrounds with equal dignity, everyone benefits. When companies hire and promote based on ability rather than appearance, everyone benefits. When we choose inclusion over exclusion, everyone benefits." As the aircraft pulled up to the gate, Diana made one final announcement over the PA structure. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened today was painful, but it was also necessary. Sometimes change requires discomfort. Sometimes progress requires confrontation. Sometimes justice requires that hidden biases be exposed to light. I didn't board this aircraft today planning to buy an airline or fire a captain or transform a company culture. I boarded this aircraft as a tired woman who wanted to sleep during a long flight. But when discrimination reveals itself, we have a choice. We can ignore it or we can address it. Today we addressed it. Today we chose justice over comfort, truth over politeness, and dignity over discrimination. Today we proved that change is possible when people are willing to stand up for what's right." The aircraft came to a stop at the gate and passengers began to applaud one final time. But this applause was different. It wasn't just appreciation for entertainment or admiration for power. It was recognition that they had witnessed something transformative, something that would ripple outward far beyond this single flight. Diana Mitchell had boarded the aircraft as a passenger and revealed herself as an owner. But more importantly, she had transformed a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for change, proving that dignity and grace could be more powerful than anger and retaliation. As passengers began to depart, Sophia Martinez stopped Diana one last time. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, "I have one question. When they first started discriminating against you, did you know you were going to reveal who you were?" Diana smiled. "Sophia, I knew exactly who I was from the moment I boarded this aircraft. The question was whether they were going to give me a reason to let them know." And with that, Diana Mitchell walked off the aircraft she owned, leaving behind a crew that would never again assume they knew anything about a passenger based on appearance, and passengers who would never again remain silent when they witnessed discrimination. Sometimes justice doesn't just knock on the door. Sometimes justice owns the building. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own experiences with discrimination, or inspired you to speak up when you witness injustice, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when someone judged you based on your appearance, or when you found the courage to stand up for what's right. Your stories matter, your voice matters, and your willingness to speak truth to power, just like Sophia and Michael did on that flight, can create change in ways you might never imagine. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they dress or what they look like. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling stories that prove ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's someone who has faced discrimination themselves, or maybe it's someone who needs to be reminded that their assumptions about others might be wrong. Either way, sharing these stories helps create a world where what happened to Diana becomes impossible. And remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Your dignity isn't subject to their approval. Your voice matters more than you know. You have the power to stand up for yourself and others, and sometimes that power can change everything. Until next time, stand tall, speak truth, and never underestimate the power of quiet strength, because you never know who you're sitting next to, and you never know when your moment to make a difference will come. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.